For context, this presentation was originally delivered to my colleagues as part of a reintroduction talk. One of the questions asked of new starters is a Jaffa cake a cake or a biscuit? After 4 years of working for CodeThink and hearing what every new person answered, I came up with this answer. Now I reformed the argument for the internet as a standalone presentation so I can present it here. Further context for anyone living outside of the UK, when I say biscuit, I'm not using the American usage of the word. British biscuits are American cookies. Jaffa cakes are a cakey or biscuity treat topped with chocolate and jello, which are available in the UK. Some people think they are cakes, other people think they are biscuits, cookies, and their manufacturer takes advantage of that ambiguity for the purposes of advertising and tax evasion. When I started at the company and gave my original introductory talk, I said, well, it's a cake, it says so on the packet. And indeed, that's what most people said in their talks too. But lately I've been thinking about a branch of philosophy called performativity. It's the concept that language can function as a form of social action and have an effect of change. It doesn't just mean spoken language, it means things like body language, and how you behave will in turn affect how you are treated by society. For example, I could with minimal effort go and buy a doctorate from the internet and say I'm a doctor. But those things wouldn't actually make me any more of a doctor because I'm not performing doctor. I'm performing trash. So, when we apply performativity to the field of cake and biscuits, we create a new sub-branch of philosophy that I'm calling performacvities. And it can tell us how confection can work as a social construct, and we might find it's a bit more nuanced than just it's a cake or it's a biscuit. So what does a Jaffa perform? To find out, I baked this cake, and I bought a pack of Jaffas and a pack of digestive chocolate biscuits, and I tested each in common scenarios for both cakes and biscuits. Things you would commonly do with a cake: decorate it, stick candles in it and have a celebration, cover it in cream and eat it with a fork. Things you would do commonly with a biscuit: buy it in a shop or dunk it in a cup of tea. Decorate it. I decorated the cake by adding icing sugar. The icing sugar serves to alter the flavour of the cake and makes it more aesthetically pleasing. This is what happens when you try and decorate a biscuit. You can do it, but it ruins the flavour and it's so small that the spectacle is lost. Also, since biscuits commonly come in multi-packs, if you want to keep the spectacle, you must do it to all of them, which I'm too lazy to do because it takes a lot of time. When decorating a Jaffa, does it behave more like a cake or a biscuit? It behaves like a biscuit. Stick candles in it and have a celebration. This is usually done at things like birthdays, where the same number of candles as the person's age is placed on top of the cake, like so. This is what happens when you try and stick candles in a biscuit and have a celebration. You lack the surface area to have more than 1 or 2 candles, and it looks like a sorry excuse for a celebration, like the sort of thing you'd have for someone you don't like very much. So when sticking candles in a Jaffa and having a celebration, does it behave more like a cake or a biscuit? It behaves like a biscuit. Cover it in cream and eat it with a fork. I don't know why we do this. I guess some people just like wet cake. Anyway, this is what cake looks like when you do this. Do note that I failed to pick it up by stabbing it. That's important later. And this is what a biscuit looks like when you do this. While I don't understand why they do this with cakes, everyone's got to admit, this just looks stupid for biscuits. And this is the Jaffa. Sure, a piece doesn't go flying off, but this is patently absurd. And it didn't taste very good either. I am able to pick up the Jaffa by stabbing it, but I wasn't able to do that with the cake or the biscuit. Of the two, I think this looks very similar to the biscuit. So, when covering a Jaffa in cream and eating it with a fork, does it behave more like a cake or a biscuit? It behaves like a biscuit. On to the common biscuit scenarios now. Buy it in a shop. I couldn't think of many things you do exclusively with a biscuit. You can buy both cakes and biscuits in a shop, but I'm just much more likely to make my own cakes than I am to buy them. But cakes and biscuits aren't sold in shops in the same place. So, I went to my local shop and I took these pictures of the cakes and biscuits sections. You can see that they have an entire shelf devoted to bite-sized cakes. They have JaffaCake bars with the cakes, but the Jaffas are sold with the biscuits, and everyone expects to find them with the biscuits. So, when buying a Jaffa, does it behave more like a cake or a biscuit? It behaves like a biscuit. Dunk it in a cup of tea. When you dunk a biscuit in a cup of tea, it absorbs some of the liquid and can generally be trusted to maintain its shape, like so. This is what a cake looks like when you try and dunk it in a brew. It does absorb some liquid, but bits fall off the cake and some of the cream melts into the brew, leaving tons of bits at the bottom and an oily layer on top. The main point is, when you dunk a biscuit, it doesn't fundamentally change the brew's flavour by adding ingredients. So when you dunk a Jaffa, does it behave more like a cake or a biscuit? The Jaffa stays in one piece and the brew's flavour is unchanged. It behaves like a biscuit. Now, I'm not trying to argue that McVitie's don't sell them as cakes. Cakes are tax exempt, so I'm sure if they could get away with it, they would sell all of their biscuits as cakes. Legend has it, they proved it's a cake to a court by baking a massive one, and I'd argue that constitutes a completely new product, and by arguing that they go hard when they go stale. Indeed, those things are true, and I'm not arguing that they don't have a distinctly cakey recipe. The Jaffa can't help the circumstances of its birth. When I die, it would be downright disrespectful to start calling me a man again just because I have a Y chromosome and somehow that means I go hard when I'm gone. Jaffa cakes were undoubtedly assigned cake at birth, but to call them cakes ignores the reality of their lived experience. The reality is, the Jaffa cake is doing everything in its power to present to the world as its authentic self. Therefore, I conclude that a Jaffa cake is a trans biscuit. They're still called Jaffa cakes though. It's an unfortunate last name, but the JaffaCake has chosen to keep it, and we should respect that. And that was the presentation I gave to my colleagues. As a consequence of this, we don't ask new starters this question anymore. I was trying to explain to them some of what I was feeling in a fun way that everyone in the company could relate to. After all, we were all asked this question at one point, and I feel like I was successful. That said, I'm sorry for new starters at CodeThink. I feel like I've ruined this for you. I'm publishing this on Trans Day of Visibility. And while I did successfully convince my colleagues of the biscuity essence of Jaffa cakes, I must admit there is a little white lie at the end there. In my country, the UK, we don't currently have self-ID for legal gender. And while this has no impact on day-to-day life, it means that without a gender recognition certificate, I would actually be considered a man again in the event of my untimely demise. It takes at least 2 years of having been transitioned and a lot of hard work to get one of these certificates, and sadly, most Jaffa cakes don't live for that long. Without their confectionery recognition certificates, when they die, they go back to being cakes. For trans people, this is literally a matter of life and death. But people who oppose trans rights often spread FUD about self-ID by erroneously claiming that it has something to do with letting men access women's spaces. These people come from all over the political spectrum, including the main 2 political parties and many of the smaller ones. They are editors for basically every mainstream news outlet, and in some cases, these bigots are even authors of some half-rate children's books. Having a gender recognition certificate doesn't just mean trans people can die as the correct gender, it also gates things like our rights to marriage and access to our pensions. It has nothing to do with access to spaces for the correct gender, since we have that already and have had that since time immemorial. With that in mind, if you have found this argument persuasive, I would ask that you join me in stomping out bigotry wherever you find it, and by asking the government to support self-ID by making the gender recognition certificate acquisition process easier.